how can we make a facial texture like this animate on our character rig kind of like this? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Huge shout out to Lacruzo for making this amazing video on animating faces with 2D textures in Blender, by the way. Definitely go check that video out if you want a really good breakdown on how to actually make textures like this from scratch. And give their channel a subscribe because their content is really, really good. But without further ado, let's get into how to make it on our own character here. So we have our character all rigged here, but now we want to make sure that we can animate our character's eyes and mouth by swapping between different textures on our face texture. So to do that, first thing we're going to want to do is, if you'd like to follow along with me here, go to the link in the video description below and click on this Patreon post right here. You do have to be a member of my Patreon to click on this post, but don't worry, joining as a member is totally free. So after you do that, all you need to do is click on this right here, which is LoveChan Textures Facial Textures Fixed.png. So just click on there or right here and download this texture, because the original version I had actually had some issues. So make sure to download this updated version of the texture, which I will link in the description box below. After that, we're gonna want to make a brand new material on LoveChan here. So we're gonna click on her face here, which is this model right here. We're gonna go down to material properties and press this plus icon right here. Then we're gonna select our LoveChan body material that we already made, and we're gonna duplicate this by pressing this little duplicate button right here. Now I want to rename this new material LoveChan Face. This is going to be our LoveChan Face texture. Now we're going to want to drag up a new panel here by going to the bottom left of our viewport here and dragging up like this. Then I'm going to switch this over to a shader editor tab. So I'm going to click shader editor from this little drop down right here. And now we want to replace this body texture with our facial texture that we just downloaded. So I'm going to drag in, so I'm literally going to Windows right here. I'm finding the texture I downloaded on my computer, and then I'm dragging and dropping it in to our shader editor like so. And I'm gonna put it right here and delete this one like so. So that didn't actually update anything yet. And the reason for that is we have to actually assign this texture to our face here. So to assign a texture to a face in Blender, all you need to do is, first of all, I'm going to isolate our model by pressing / on my keyboard. So I'm just looking at this model right here. Then we're going to go to front view and just tab to go into edit mode, and press W to go to the select box tool, and press Alt A to deselect all. Now I want to assign this new texture to all the different parts of our face here that are going to be animated. So that's going to be this part. Excuse me, I'm going to press 3 to make sure I'm on face select. So I'm going to select this face, these faces, all these faces, and I'll even press C to go to the circle select tool and select all these faces like so. So now that all of these are selected, I can press H to verify, yep, those are the right ones. That's fantastic. Now I want to go to my LoveChan face material and click assign. And we can tell it worked because it looks really weird and funky now. And the reason it looks super weird right now is because our face texture has different dimensions than our LoveChan body texture. It's gonna actually mess up our UVs here, which means we need to do them once more. But we can do that super quickly here. So to do that, I am going to, again, making sure I have all these faces still selected, press U on my keyboard and do project from view, making sure I have those faces selected. Then I'm gonna make a brand new panel right here and go to the UV editor panel, which I can just click up here and press U on my keyboard to enter. Or again, it's right there, the UV editor. Now I'm gonna press G and scale up my face on my first face texture right here. I'll zoom in here, see how this is looking. And I kind of want to line up the shadow of the nose right here with the bottom of my nose geometry. Kind of like that. Though I'm not going to aim for perfection here because this is just a tutorial on how to swap face textures. I do have tutorials on this channel for UV unwrapping if you want to go check those out that go into a lot more depth than this. So that's how our face texture is going to be laid out. That's looking pretty good to me. So now how do we actually animate between these? We're going to want to do that in the shader editor, which we already have at the bottom of Blender here. So I'm actually going to scooch these over so I can kind of see what I'm doing a little bit better and make this a little bit bigger. That's good enough for now. And with the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, I'm going to click on my texture here and press Ctrl+T to add a mapping and texture coordinate node. Now, if that didn't work for you, you have to have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, but luckily that's included with every version of Blender by default. Go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, Node Wrangler, and make sure that is checked. So with that checked, click on your texture here and press Ctrl+T to add a mapping and texture coordinate node. Now you're gonna notice something interesting. If we change the X location on our texture here, nothing is actually going to happen. And the reason why nothing is changing in our viewport here is that we need to be on either material preview or rendered view. So if I go to material preview, then change my X location, now you're going to see that our texture is moving between all of our different faces here, because think of how axes work in Blender by looking at the top right of our viewport here. We can see that this is the X-axis. So we're scrolling our texture across the X-axis because, as you can see by the way our texture is laid out, we just have our textures like one by one laid out in a row like this. So the only location we need to change on this mapping node is going to be the X location. If you had your textures, laid out vertically rather than horizontally, you would also be changing, for example, the Y, but in our case here, we only want to worry about this X axis like so. And if we look at our texture right here, we're going to notice that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different faces on LoveChan here. And as a result, we're going to want to add 6 of a new node that we're going to introduce and add right now called the Combine XYZ node. So we can press Shift+A to spawn in a new node in the shader editor. We'll press search and then do Combine XYZ. Like so. And this is going to be our first one, which is just going to be this first texture all the way on the left here. But we want to duplicate this node by pressing Shift+D, which is the same duplication hotkey as most other parts of Blender. Then we're going to preview what this looks like by plugging the output from this vector into the input of this location on this mapping node, which is not actually going to change anything just yet. Let me make this nice and big here so we can see what's going on in the 3D viewport. So if we change the X location on this Combine XYZ, again, making sure we're in material preview or rendered, so this actually updates, you're gonna see we're gonna animate between all of our different faces here. But of course, we want this first one to transition to this first face right here. Then we want a second XYZ to transition to this facial texture, the third to this facial texture, the fourth to this facial texture, and this one will be our final XYZ node, the sixth. So now we're going to move our XYZ node and hold shift so that when we're moving and changing this value, it's a lot smoother and we have a lot more fine grained control over this. Then we're gonna go to this second facial texture right here on our texture here. So with this lined up, holding shift and left click, you're gonna see that does not line up perfectly. And to fix that, all I need to do is punch in some numbers the old fashioned way here. So 0.16, let's try 1. That's moving in the right direction, so I know I have to decrease this value. So I'll do 2, maybe 4 is right. There we go. So I'm just trying to line up the bottom of my nose with my texture there. So that's looking pretty good. So now I'm gonna duplicate this XYZ node once again, and I'll plug in the vector to the location of this mapping node like so. And because I know that when I laid these out, these are generally evenly spaced, you can actually just multiply this X value by 2 in order to get to this next facial texture right here. And to do that in Blender, there's actually a really awesome, super quick way you can do this by selecting your value, so double clicking on it so you're editing it. Then I'm gonna press space. Actually, I don't even need to press space, I don't think. So I'm just gonna add an asterisk here. So that's Shift+8 if you don't know that. And then I'm gonna type 2, which will multiply this value by exactly 2. Yeah, and you don't even need a space. So with that value multiplied by 2, you can now see that we've transitioned into this next facial texture, which is our third facial texture, which is perfect. So I'm gonna now duplicate this Combine XYZ node again by pressing Shift+D, and I know that I wanna multiply this node by 3 now. So I'm gonna copy and paste this value from the first Combine XYZ, or excuse me, the second Combine XYZ node. Then I'm gonna multiply this by 3. So that was multiplied by 2, this one's multiplied by 3, and we'll double check our work by plugging this vector into the location. That's looking pretty good, though it's slightly misaligned, so I can kind of change this value here to see if that will get it better. That was the wrong direction. So I'll increase this by 1 by going 493, and that's looking pretty good. And that will be our fourth facial texture. We'll duplicate this again. We'll paste this value in once again, and we'll multiply this one by 4. Right? Yeah, so now we're gonna plug this vector into the location up here once again. And I see that I'm in edit mode. I actually don't need to be in edit mode. I'm just gonna go back into object mode here so my life's a little easier because edit mode undoing is awkward. And now I can see that I'm on my fifth facial texture, which is fantastic. So again, I'm gonna press Shift D to duplicate this, paste in my value, and multiply it by 6. Now I'm going to plug this in to our location. And I think I went too far. I think I need to multiply that by 5, excuse me. So multiply that by 5. There we go. Now that's perfect. Awesome. So now if we plug in our first vector into this location, we have our first facial texture. We do our second, we have our second facial texture. We do our third, we're gonna have our third facial texture. Our fourth will have our fourth facial texture. Our fifth will have our fifth facial texture. And our sixth will have our sixth facial texture, as you would expect. So now we're going to want to add mix nodes so that we can actually animate between all these different combined XYZ nodes. So I'm gonna press Shift plus A, search, and then I'm going to type mix to add this mix node right here. Then I'm going to set the factor to 0 and switch this from float to vector. So this is going to be a vector mix node with a factor of 0. Then I'm going to put the vector from my XYZ node number 1 here into the A slot of my mix node, and my second XYZ into the vector of the B slot, like so. Then I'm gonna put the result into my location of my mapping node, and you can see that by changing the factor on this mix node, we're gonna animate between our first facial expression and our second facial expression, which is awesome. And you kinda wanna just keep duplicating this mix node until all of our facial textures are integrated into this setup. So I'm gonna move things around by box selecting so that things are gonna look a little bit more clean, like so. Kinda line these up by box selecting like this. Now we're going to press Shift plus D to duplicate this mix node. And now that we've duplicated this mix node and moved it to the right a little bit, we're going to see that the result from our first mix node is plugged into the A here. And we'll literally just take the vector from our next combined XYZ and plug it to the B. Line this up, Shift D, move it up here so it plugs into the A. Plug this into the vector of the B. Then I'm actually going to move these over a bit like so. Again, Shift plus D, plug this in. Plug in the vector output into the B socket right here in this mix node. Move this over a little more. Then I'm going to press Shift plus D once more and plug in our final facial texture into the B slot from its vector output. So there we go. Now we have all of our facial textures set up into these mix nodes. And by changing this factor, you're going to see that we're going to swap between our facial textures every time we change these factors on all these mix nodes, which is super cool. However, to properly animate between these, we don't actually want this sliding effect, right? Because if you're animating between these and it slid like this, that would look a little awkward. We kind of want it to like snap between all these mix nodes. And to do that, we're going to use a math node set to greater than and a value node. So I'm going to press Shift plus A and type in value. Then I'll press Shift plus A and type in math. That's not how you spell math. There we go, math. So I'm going to set this math node from add to greater than. Then I'll set the threshold to 1. So it's a greater than math node with a threshold of 1. Then I'm going to plug this value node into the value of this greater than node. Then I want the value input from this greater than to go into the factor of this mixed node. Because remember, by changing this factor, that's how we're changing between these facial expressions. So by plugging in the value from this greater than input, it means the value on this facial texture will only increase when its threshold on this greater than node is above 1. And now I just want to duplicate this for every mixed node that I have. So I'm going to press Shift plus D, duplicate this, plug in the value from my value node, and plug in the value output from this greater than node into the factor of my next mixed node right here, and set the threshold of this next greater than to 2. Then do it again, Shift D, value to value. Then the value output of the greater than into our next mixed node, set the threshold to 3, Shift D, value to factor, value to value, threshold to 4, Shift plus D, value to value, value to factor, and threshold of 5. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now when we change the value on this value node, it's going to snap between all of our facial textures as it becomes a threshold above 1, then a threshold above 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to increase this like so. Eyes are going to become closed because we're above 1. Then they're going to become happy eyes because we're above 2. Then they're going to become shocked because we're above 3. Then they're going to become dazed as we go above 4. Then they're going to become silly as we go above 5 here. And if you're confused why it's a value of 5 rather than 6 because we have 6 facial textures here, that's just because our value below 1 is actually our first texture. So that's the reason it only goes to 5. So we actually have this all set up now. This looks a little messy, but we're actually doing it, right? This is how we animate between our facial expressions, and you could just leave this here. However, animating in the shader editor is extremely annoying and not recommended. That's why we're gonna add a bone to our rig that actually controls this value node so that we can actually just animate the face and mouth textures on our rig as we're animating, which is much, much faster and a lot more intuitive. So let me show you how to do that right now. So first of all, I'm gonna click on my model and press / to get out of this isolated view. Then I'm going to want to spawn in a new bone. So I'm gonna click on my rig in object mode, tab to go into edit mode. Then I'm gonna press Shift+A to spawn in this new bone here. I'm actually gonna click on my bone right now and name it face_control. This is gonna be our face control bone. Then I'm gonna press 1 to go into orthographic front view and press G to move it up, S to scale it down, like so. And I'll even go to the side view and rotate this. We'll say -90 degrees, like that. All right, so that's looking pretty good, but we don't actually want this in the bone collection it's in right now. We're gonna make a brand new bone collection for this bone and call it face control. So I'm gonna press plus to add a new bone collection right here. Then at the bottom of my bone collections, I'm gonna have this new collection called bones. Then I'm gonna double click on it and call it face controllers, like so. Then making sure I have my new bone selected, I'm gonna click assign, and now I'm gonna press this star icon to isolate this bone so that this is the only bone I'm seeing right now, which is very convenient for us. So now that this is the only bone we're seeing here, we're gonna go back into object mode and click on my LoveChan face material here. Then we're gonna go to this value node that we spawned in and right click on it and hit add driver. Now you're gonna see a very confusing, scary looking menu, and you might even mouse out of it, which makes it disappear and you're freaking out like, where'd that menu go? What's going on? Don't worry about it. All you need to do to fix that is right click on wherever you created your driver and click edit driver to bring that same menu up again. Now we want to set our object here in our driver to our rig, and in our case here, our rig is literally just called rig. That is our quote unquote object, and the bone we want is that bone we just spawned in, which is called face control. So we're gonna type face, and face_control is the bone we want. So that's perfect. Then the type we're gonna set to Z location because we want it so that when we go up and down, that's going to change the texture on our face here. And we're gonna make sure to set the space to local space. Otherwise it's gonna be in world space, which is gonna be kind of confusing and not really what we want here. So we're gonna set it to local space. So with all of that out of the way, something really cool is gonna happen here because we can click on our bone now, go into pose mode and move it around. And as you can see, nothing is happening unless we press Z and go down. Now we can see that it's actually changing the facial expressions on our character here, which is super awesome. However, it's only doing that when we go down on the Z axis, which is not really what we want, right? And to fix that, all I need to do is select my bone, press tab to go into edit mode. Then I'm gonna open the transform menu here by pressing N. And we can see what's causing our issue because our bone roll is actually set to -180. And to visualize bone roll and like the axes on your bone, all you need to do is scroll down on this object data properties tab, and where it says axes, check this little box right here. Now we can see that this is exactly upside down, which is not really what we want here. We want to set our bone roll to 0 here rather than -180. So I'm going to set that to 0 so that Z will actually be up, because as we can see right here, looking at the axes on our 3D viewport here, Blender is a Z up program. Some programs are actually Y up, which is, kind of confusing, but Blender is a Z up program. So we want Z to be facing up here. Now, if I go back into pose mode here and move my bone up rather than down on the Z-axis, it's going to start animating between our expressions, which is fantastic. However, it takes a lot of movement to actually get it to change between our expressions, which is really annoying. So to fix that, I am just going to select our face again, and I'm just selecting my face to go make sure I'm in my LoveChan face material in the shader editor, of course. Then I'm gonna right click on our value here and edit the driver once again. And we're gonna go to the expression tab right here. And where it says plus 0.38, we're actually gonna replace that with multiplied by, and we're actually gonna multiply our value by, we can do any number we want. We can do 10 or 15 here, but in my case here, we'll start with 15 just to see what that's looking like. So now when we go back to move our bone, move it up on the Z-axis. It's going to take a lot less movement to move through all 6 of our face textures like here. So you can see it requires much less movement, which is a lot more easy to control, which is awesome. However, it's kind of not the best setup in the world, because if we just move this around, we can kind of move this wherever, which is not a great rig setup. We would actually want it so that it can only move on the Z-axis. But how do we actually do that? Well, there's a tab right at the bottom right of Blender here called the Bone Constraints Properties tab. And I'm in pose mode, so that's going to be visible. It might not be visible in certain other modes, but make sure your bone is selected in pose mode and then go into bone constraint properties. Then we're going to want to add a bone constraint to our face control bone, and it's going to be limit location. So we want to add this limit location transform bone constraint. Then we're going to want to check these boxes next to minimum X and Y, and check these boxes right here, maximum X and Y. And you're going to see that this teleports our bone to the face of our character, which we don't want. And to fix that, we're going to go to owner, local space. So owner is going to be set to local space here. Now, if we try to move our bone on the X axis or the Y axis, it is not going to work. It's only going to move on the Z axis, which is much better. So that's already a much better setup. However, we could still move this in the wrong direction, which is in the negative Z axis. We actually only want it so that this bone moves in the positive Z axis, because this is unnecessary. We would never actually want the bone to go this direction. So to fix that, I'm going to set our maximum Z to whatever value our final texture is when we move it. So that sounds a little confusing, but all that really means is move your bone up until you're on your final facial texture, which in my case is going to be the silly one. Then when you do that, from your move menu here, where you see your Z value, literally just copy that and then enable maximum Z, then paste that right there. Your minimum Z is already going to be at 0, so you don't need to worry about that. Then just move your bone. And now your bone is only going to go where you actually want it to, which is perfect. You can even go to bone properties here, go to viewport display and change your bone color here. So I'll change this to pink, for example. That's not pink. Pink, for example. And that can look kind of nice. So this is already fantastic. We can already animate our character's facial expressions in our rig itself, which is super awesome. But more often than not, you're going to want to animate this mouth and the eyes separately from each other. So how do you actually do that? Well, we're going to actually want to create a new material to do that. So I'm going to go back into object mode, click on my face here, and go to this material properties tab. Then I'm going to spawn in a new material by pressing this plus icon, and I'm going to select my LoveChan face material. Then I'm going to duplicate my LoveChan face material and rename this new material LoveChan_mouth. Now we want to assign the mouth material that we just made to just her mouth here. So we're going to go to the front orthographic view, select our object, go into edit mode, then just select these faces on her mouth here. Then I'm going to go to our brand new LoveChan mouth material and click assign. And now that that's done, we want to go back into object mode, select our bone, press tab to go into edit mode, and press shift plus D to duplicate it. So we just duplicated our face control bone. Then in edit mode, I'm going to press G plus X to move this over. And because we're in edit mode, we can still move it along any axis that we want. Then I'm going to rename this bone mouth_control. Then I'm going to select my first bone here and press F2 to rename this eye_control. So we're going to have an eye control right here and a mouth control right here. And I can even go into the bone properties tab right here and change the color of this so that it's blue, just for visual clarity's sake. Now I want to go into object mode once again, select my face object right here. Then I'm going to go to the material properties tab right here, and making absolutely sure I have my mouth texture selected, or excuse me, my mouth material selected and not my face material, I'm going to press right click on my driver, click edit driver, make sure that my make sure that my object is still our rig like so. Then I'm going to click on bone here and make sure that this is now set to our mouth control. So this is the bone we just duplicated here, and I'm going to select it like so. So this bone right here should now be in control of changing our mouth texture. And just to make sure that our eye texture is working as intended, I'm going to go back to the LoveChan_face. In fact, I'll just rename this LoveChan_eyes because that's going to make a lot more sense. Then I'm going to right click on this, hit edit driver, make sure the object is set to rig. So like that. Then make sure my bone is set to eye control like that. Now I'm going to go into object mode, select my bones, and press Ctrl plus Tab to go into pose mode. And if I move this bone right here, you're going to see we're going to animate between our eye textures. And if we move this bone here, we're going to animate between our mouth textures, which is fantastic. This is now working exactly as we wanted to. I'm going to go to the Object Data Properties tab. I'm going to click this star so that we're not isolating this bone collection exclusively. And now we can now animate Love Chan exactly as we see fit using everything we learned about rigging, weight painting, etc. And we can even animate her face textures like so using these two bones that we just created. Plus, if we want these bones to follow the rotation of the head, so for example, we could have it so that when we rotate our head, our bones will follow along with our head. All we need to do is to select our bone, then go to edit mode right here, then go to the bone properties tab right here. Then in relations, we want to change the parent of our bone to be def spine 006. So this bone is now the child of that bone. I can do it on this mouth control bone here as well. So I'll make this parent of this bone def spine 006. Now, if we go to object mode and rotate our head around, you're going to see that these bones follow our head like so. We can even translate them like this and also have the bones follow along like this. And they will only change expressions when we actually move them around like this. So that can be super handy if you want the bones to follow along with your character, and it helps you not lose them when you're in the midst of an animation. So that actually wraps up this low poly series, which means that the price of the course is going to increase in just a few days on September 7th. So make sure to pick up the Gumroad version of the low poly series before the 7th when the price increases. Like the video and comment below if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the very next video.